Wendy is a really phenomenal expert in this area. And so we're really happy to have you tonight, Wendy. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about regional center services, sort of give a basic overview, kind of what your rights are related to regional center services. And then I do actually have some slides in here about other agency services like Medi-Cal, IHSS, Department of Rehab. You know, some of those, like Department of Rehab, wouldn't really apply unless the person in your family with a disability is an adult, but it's still part of the slides and might be useful later. So we'll start with regional center. Next slide.
Okay.
And you can even skip that one. It's just like a copyright slide that I have to put in. So just the only thing I want you guys to know is that this is for educational purposes, and you're going to want to double check the law that I've cited because sometimes it changes. Okay, so regional center is part of the California Department of Developmental Services. That is actually the state agency that has all the funding. It is specific to California, even though other states have a similar service. It's specific to California. So DDS is the state agency that oversees it all, and then they push the money out to 21 regional centers, which are nonprofit, it's like contracted nonprofit agencies, right? And there's 21 of them in California. So they're not in every county, but they cover all the counties, all 21 of them do. And basically they're the local facility that's responsible for providing the supports and services. So they get the funding stream is DDS, and then they take that money and provide it to clients of the regional centers. So we'll talk about over age 3, because under 3 is early start. It's a part of the school system. It's a little bit different. Over age 3, we kind of call you're eligible under the Lanterman Act, right? So there's specific criteria to be a regional center client, which most of you probably know. There's 5 disabilities. Autism, or now it's autism spectrum disorder, because there's a lot of things that fall under that. Cerebral palsy, which is like a neurological disability. Epilepsy, which is a seizure disorder. Intellectual disability, which is low cognitive scores, and then you also have to have low adaptive functioning scores. And then something we call 5th category, which people say, oh, it's the catch-all, but it's not really, because you don't have to have an IQ of 70 like intellectual disability, but you still have to have a pretty low IQ, and you have to function like somebody who has an intellectual disability, even though you don't meet that criteria. I'm going to just close my door real quick because I can hear my cat and I don't want it to be distracting.
You bet.
So give me one sec. All right, I hope that helps. All right. The disability has to originate before 18. It doesn't mean you have to find it before 18, although it's easier to get somebody eligible if it's found before 18, but sometimes they're missed, right? So somebody might have autism and they're higher functioning, so you don't really see how the deficits affect them until they're closer to 18 or even over 18. And then once you prove it was prior to 18, and once you prove it's one of those disabilities, you then have to prove it's a substantial disability. And that's actually defined, and it means you have to show that your disability has deficits in 3 of these 7 areas that are listed here. So communication, learning, self-care, mobility, self-direction, and then the last 2 are really for people who are older. Capacity for independent living would count around 16 or 17, and economic self-sufficiency would be closer to someone who's 18, because they're looking at how does the person function related to somebody without a disability of the same age. This was from that prior, this is one of those edits I needed to make from the prior presentation. So one of the important things to know about regional center is it's not income based. There are some cost sharing programs which are listed here. The Family Cost Participation Program, Annual Family Program Fee, and Parental Fee Program, and they all have different criteria, but you can make as much money or have as much money in the bank and still receive regional center services. You just may have to pay what we call, it's kind of like a copay basically, and it's not very much. And they do it to sort of offset the cost of services, but anybody who meets the criteria is eligible despite their income. So the Family Cost Participation Program is specific to certain regional center services. It only applies when you're getting daycare, respite, or camping, or camp services, which they don't really do much anymore. But and daycare is typically for somebody under 21. Respite can be for anybody. So sometimes they'll offset it by saying, oh, you have to pay like $100 a year or $200 a year because you make this much money. But when you don't have to pay it if the person is on Medi-Cal. You do have to pay it if they're 17 or younger, but not if they're getting Medi-Cal. So if someone's getting Medi-Cal, this does not apply to them, okay? And it is based off parents' income, obviously not off the 17-year-old's income. I do give a link here because DDS, so the overarching state agency, has publications on these family fee programs. So the one we just talked about and any other ones, there's 3 actually, and you can just click on the little link and it'll take you to like this little publication that explains to you if you have to pay and what the exceptions are basically to that rule. I think so for the Family Cost Participation Program, the director of your regional center can exempt you from paying, even if you're 400% or more of the federal poverty level, if there's 2 ways that their director can do it. If there's substantiated, unavoidable, and uninsured catastrophic loss that would limit the parent's ability to pay. So somebody maybe has an accident and there's like lots of medical bills because of it, or someone gets sick and there's medical bills, or other unreimbursed medical costs. So maybe someone's getting speech therapy privately and they're paying co-pays weekly of like $100, and it makes it impossible for them to pay this. The regional center doesn't want you to be limited from seeking other resources and not theirs, right? So they're not going to hold you accountable for this family cost sharing program. The annual family program fee, again, this is for people who are 400% or more of the federal poverty level, and it's for people 0 to 18. So once they're 18, they're considered the responsibility of the state of California. And even though there might be some moral obligation by parents, there's no legal obligation. So this would not apply to anyone who's 18 or older. And again, if the person's on Medi-Cal, then they're not responsible for this fee. And this is one of those fees where it's like they look at your income of the household and they say, okay, you're 400% federal poverty level, your annual cost is $200. And you're like, great, I'll pay that because I get all these services, right? So it's important to just be aware of these things because they might come up. I guess the other important thing to know is that there's always exceptions to these rules. So ask what the exceptions are. Like, is there an exception to that? Again, oh, sorry. I think it went back. Did it go backwards? Yeah, there we go. So for this one, it's exemptions. And one exemption, again, would be catastrophic loss that limits the parent's ability, or the money that you're going to use for that is necessary to maintain the child in the home. So again, they don't want to put anything in place that's going to interfere with children remaining in their parental home. The Parental Fee Program is a little bit unique, and it only applies to people under 18 who are not living in the family home. So if you have a minor child and they're living in a group home, there might be a cost associated with that. But there's a whole graph on DDS's website that shows you how they figure it out. And one of the important things to know is they'll never charge you, like the fee will never be more than what it costs to raise a child in the Western region. And you can find that on, I think it's like United States agricultural website or something, and it lists like what it costs to raise one kid in 2022. And I just looked because somebody was asking me, and it's like between $15,000 and $17,000 a year, which that seems quite low to me, but they'll never, for 2022, if your child lived outside of the home and they're a minor, they'll never charge you more than $17,000 for the year, which is like $1,200 a month for the out-of-home placement, basically. Okay, so what are some of the services people can get with Regional Center? There is, the Welfare and Institutions Code has a list. There's a lot of them. It's Welfare and Institutions Code, section 4512B. This is just some of them. It's not exhaustive. And even if it's not listed in 4512B, you could probably still get it. So they're supposed to provide unique and individualized and creative services to keep people with developmental disabilities in their community. So that could be lots of things, right? But here's some of the ones that are normally authorized. Respite, people probably know what respite is. It's to give caregivers a break. There's speech and language, OT, physical therapy, behavior modification programs, including ABA. RDI is another one. They have daycare, which is a service you can get if you're working full-time, and sometimes they provide it when the student, like the child gets home from school at like 3 and the parents have to work till 6. They'll pay for a caregiver between those times. Adult daycare programs, which is like adult day programs for people who are 18 or 22. Supported living, which is caregivers will come into somebody's home who lives in their own home, like an apartment or whatever, and take care of them in lieu of parents. So the Regional Center can pay for an agency to come in and provide staff so that people with developmental disabilities can live in their own homes like people without developmental disabilities. And you don't have to pay for that, and you don't have to manage it, but the person does have to be 18 or older. Supported employment, which is, again, it's employment, but there's like a job coach, or there's somebody there that's like a mentor who's training, keeping the person on task and helping them be successful in their employment. Durable medical equipment, which would be like a wheelchair or a walker. Transportation at times, like people can get transportation to their employment or to their day program. Residential placement, which is group homes basically, And then another one is mobility training. Sometimes the regional center will, they'll hire an agency to come and try to train the client on how to safely take public transportation. And then if they're not able to do that, that agency tells regional center, they're not able to do that, it's unsafe, you need to pay for private transportation. So it's almost like an assessment of their needs and then a training as well. And if the training isn't successful, then they're eligible for private transportation. So those are just a few things. There's lots more. Okay, one of the other things that's important to remember is regional center is the payer of last resort. So what does that mean? That means they want you to pursue any other generic resources first, right? So what are generic resources? Medi-Cal, IHSS, anything you can get through private insurance. What you don't have to do is pursue those resources if you have to pay out of pocket. So if you pursue Medi-Cal because regional center wants you to, but then you're paying like a share of cost out of pocket every month, that's not required because you can't access the service for free like you would be able to from regional center. One example of what you do have to do is if you have private insurance or Medi-Cal and they'll pay for like ABA, you have to do that, even if there's a copay, but the copay should be covered by regional center then. So they want to see that you're pursuing generic resources, but if those resources aren't available, then you don't have to pursue them. You don't have to go get private insurance and pay for that monthly if you don't have it. Another important term is gap funding. So let's say you're asking for like caregivers to come into the home. The regional center might say to you, you need to go get IHSS. Like that's through the county, that's through Medi-Cal, that's your generic resource, you have to pursue it. Well, yeah, you do, but until it's in place, they have to gap fund, meaning they have to pay for what you need until those other agencies pick it up. And there's a likelihood that they won't pick it up. So then it's regional center's responsibility. But in the interim, the regional center should be paying for it. Okay. Oh, TRICARE, if anyone's in the military, TRICARE is another generic resource that has to be pursued. All right. I just kind of talked about this, the gap funding, where you have to pursue IHSS, and then if it's while you're waiting, the regional center can pay for other caregivers, whether it's respite, personal assistance, which does very similar duties as an IHSS worker. The other thing I want to mention about TRICARE, because I don't know if anyone's in the military, but TRICARE usually will offer respite, but I've heard from lots of families that there's a waiting list because there's not a lot of providers that accept TRICARE. If that's the case, let's say you've pursued a generic resource, but it's not available because there's a wait list, regional center has to do it. So if you've gone through TRICARE and they're like, oh man, it's a 6-month waiting list for respite, all you have to do is go to regional center and tell them that, and they're going to have to pay for that respite until TRICARE is able to pick it up. Okay. Okay. So there are other public benefits that exist besides regional center. We kind of talked about IHSS a little bit. This isn't like an in-depth look at them, but I'll like briefly touch on them so that you are aware of like what other agency services exist. And then obviously when we get to the Q&A section, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have about them if I don't touch on it during the presentation. Okay, so Medi-Cal. This is a state, people probably know what this is, but it's a state-funded medical insurance. It's also called Medicaid federally. So in California, it's called Medi-Cal, but it is a federal insurance. It's a federally funded insurance. I think the most important thing about Medi-Cal is EPSDT, which is early and periodic screening, diagnostic, and treatment services. This is for anybody under 21 The valuable thing about this is that they will cover lots of services for people under 21. They'll cover speech if you can get a speech pathologist or a doctor to say it's medically necessary. They'll cover occupational therapy. These are things that Regional Center fights you on. This is stuff Medi-Cal will cover if you have someone say it's medically necessary. They'll cover diapers, they'll cover formula, they'll cover ABA now or other behavior modification programs. One of the other important services which we'll talk about is IHSS, which is in-home support services, and we'll get to it, but that's basically a paid caregiver, whether it's a parent because they have to leave full-time employment to care for their child with a disability, or it could even be somebody who's not a parent and they get paid to be that caregiver, a cousin, an aunt, a grandma. And then people who have medical issues, there's also a program called in-home nursing, and it's actually also very valuable. They'll assess what your level of care would be in a nursing facility, and they'll give you that amount of money towards in-home nursing. So if you need it 24/7, and this could be an elderly person if they're eligible for Medi-Cal, if they need 24/7 nursing and they're assessed to need that, Medi-Cal can pay for that as long as you meet the income requirements for Medi-Cal. Oh, most services require a prior authorization. It's called a treatment authorization request, or a TAR. And any doctor or speech pathologist who accepts Medi-Cal knows that those are required before providing services. Okay, so IHSS, or in-home support services, which we sort of just talked about, is where a caregiver can be paid. You can get up to 283 hours a month paid. It includes tasks or hours in areas like hygiene, toileting, feeding, ambulation if somebody has ambulation issues, bathing and grooming, which includes like showering, brushing teeth, helping them get dressed. And then there's what we call protective supervision. So somebody who has a cognitive impairment or a mental illness that interferes with their ability to understand the consequences of their actions could be eligible for protective supervision. The good thing about that category is it's an automatic 195 hours a month. So if you can prove someone's eligible for that, like they don't have safety awareness, they don't know when they elope, they could get hit by a car, that's an automatic 195. And then all the other hours that they've assessed in other areas like bathing, toileting, those just get added on top of the 195, and you can get up to 283 a month. I think the pay rate is like 15.5 right now. It could be higher. I haven't looked in a while, but maybe 15.5 an hour. So if you multiply that by 283, it's pretty good to have a caregiver come in. The hard part with IHSS is if you find somebody from the public authority, which is just like a list of caregivers, they don't have training in behaviors, and they probably have some training, but I don't know how much. So it's a lot easier to just have a parent paid for it or a family member who understands the person's needs. Now, if the person is a minor, the parent can only be paid if they've left full-time employment to care for the child. And full-time employment to the county means 40 hours a week. So if you're getting anything under that, you're not full-time. And that's how you have to show that you've left that. I mean, all you have to say is I've left employment, my full-time employment, because I have to be there when he gets out of school or she gets out of school, and they can't be left alone. And that's enough to prove it. When you call, so you're going to call your San Diego County if you're in San Diego, and you tell them you think you're eligible for IHSS, and they're supposed to send a social worker out to do an assessment. And then they'll issue you a notice telling you how many hours And if you don't agree, you have 90 days to appeal. So in-home nursing, I talked a little bit about, but they'll also come out and assess the need. They'll look at medical needs, basically, not protective supervision, not just daily living tasks, because that would fall under IHSS. It has to be something more. So it might be G-tube or a trach, or there might be like specific medications. Somebody might have epilepsy. If you have epilepsy and you have rescue meds, then sometimes they're eligible for in-home nursing. And there is somewhat of a nursing shortage, but the nurses, they are like LVN or RN level. So you know they're trained. And it is a helpful service to keep somebody in their home instead of in like a nursing facility or a group home that has nursing. DDS waiver clients. So for families whose income are too high for Medi-Cal, you can ask the regional center to assess them for the DDS waiver. What it does is it puts the child who's under 18 under their own income level, and whatever their income is, it determines whether they're eligible for Medi-Cal. Only regional center clients get this. So the reason for it is because they're disabled. So they want to make sure they have access to all services. So they don't want parents' income to prevent a regional center client from getting Medi-Cal if they need it. And your regional center worker has to help you through that process. Another important thing to remember when you're looking at accessing services, like I don't know if anyone's service coordinator has said this to them, but cost effectiveness. So they're only going to pay for the least costly service, right? Now, it has to be comparable and it has to be adequate and it has to be appropriate. But if there's two respite agencies and one says, I'll do it for 14 an hour and they're identical, and the other one says, I'll do it for 16, client choice doesn't matter anymore, even though it's really important under the Lanterman Act because it's about cost effectiveness. Now, let's say the $16 an hour respite worker has behavior training and the $14 an hour one doesn't, and your child needs behavior training. Well, then cost effectiveness doesn't matter because those services aren't comparable, and the $14 an hour one is not appropriate for your child. Okay, so some other services that exist for adults or 18 to 22, these are potentially people who are still in special education. So we have regional center clients who are 18 and they've gotten a diploma, right? So they're eligible for all sorts of stuff. The regional center clients who are 18 to 22 and they're still in special ed, they're not eligible for a day program yet. They have to complete their special education if it's available to them. And this is the law. And even though it might not be adequate and the transition program might be terrible, it's required. But any person who's 18, whether they're in school or not, are entitled to supported living. It's just that they're not entitled to supported employment or day programs until they've completed special ed. And like I said earlier, if they get a diploma from at 18, 19, 20, anytime before 22, they are entitled to all those services as soon as they get a diploma or as soon as they get their certificate of completion for the transition program. I don't know why it's that way. It's really terrible for the clients who are in a transition program and it's not good and they're not getting anything out of it. There are a couple exceptions to this rule. The first one is the paid internship program, which is available to anybody who's 18, whether you're in special ed or not. And it's a really cool program. It's a couple years old. Regional center pays like a company or whoever is willing to accept you and train you in their program. They pay them so that it covers like the medical liability and the taxes and stuff, and it gives them an incentive to train people with disabilities. The expectation is also that they're going to hire them later. So, and they know this going into this, right? So that's available to anyone who's 18. The other exception is if the transition program through the school district is really that terrible and they're not getting anything out of it, your service coordinator can make an exception and say, yes, we understand this is horrible. You're not getting the services you need. We will pay for this, like we'll pay for supported employment, or we'll pay for you to go to this training program. And you don't have to finish, like you don't have to do your special education any longer. But the service coordinator really needs to be a part of some of those IEP meetings so that they can see for themselves that the student's not getting what they need. And I've had service coordinators make that exception. Department of Rehab is another state agency who has two pathways. You can use their services for educational support that might lead to employment, which would be like college and things like that, community college, and then supported employment assistance. And it doesn't matter if you're in school or not. That's not a requirement. So even though regional center has that requirement, Department of Rehab doesn't, and you can access their services at 18. Supported living. So some other services, we talked about supported living a little bit. There's also something called independent living services, and there is a difference between those two. So independent living services are, it's very similar to the tasks. They're teaching the person cooking, budgeting, how to safely access the community, how to take care of their laundry, right? How to clean their room, get their stuff ready for school the next day. But those services can be provided to someone who lives in their parents' home. Supported living services can be 1 hour a day to 24 hours a day. And the person has to live in their own home. That could be an apartment, it could be an ADU on the parent's property, but it has to be their own space. And so those are sort of the differences. The ILS is not, it's not 24/7. And part of that's because the person still lives in their family home. But SLS can be 24/7. And the workers could live there if you wanted to live in aid. Okay, so tailored day services is another, it's kind of like a day program, but it's tailored, right? So it kind of is what it sounds like. It's one-on-one. It could be job placement or it could be anything, but it's one-on-one. You have like one person with you. It's you and your trainer or your mentor. It's not full-time. So sometimes there's clients who are in a 6 hour a day, 5 day a week program in school and they age out at 22, and it wouldn't really be appropriate for them to be doing this because they're going to be missing lots of hours in the day. And what are you going to do with them during that time? So tailored day is more for people who might have a part-time job, might have some other things going on, an internship, and they're just going to work with this mentor a couple hours a day. It's listed here. You could do job coaching and training. They could provide educational support at a community college. They could help with job searches. They can do whatever you want. It's tailored to you. And then I don't know if everyone's heard about self-determination, but this is one of the newer funded programs. So we've had funding available for this for many years. It just never got off the ground. And last year it finally got funded and got off the ground. So I think there's mixed reviews about it. Some regional center staff don't know much about it, so it's difficult to get them to advocate and help you with it. There are advocates, there are attorneys like myself, and there are independent facilitators who know a lot about it. They can help you with your budget. They can help you try to get as much money possible in your budget. But self-determination is essentially, they look at all of your last year's funding. They take that and that's where they start. And they say, okay, here's your base budget, right? Now we're going to talk about what is missing. What's your unmet need? And then you talk about the unmet need and what that might be, and they put money into the budget for that. And then you get this overall budget for the year. You don't have to use it the way it was used before, and it's for the whole year. And you can take it and you can use it with people. You can hire staff that are not vendors of the regional center. You can use it for whatever you want as long as it fits into those categories that self-determination allows. And there's quite a few, and you can find them on DDS's website. But the beauty of it is it's flexible. And there's so many wait lists right now to get respite, to get supported living, to get behavior modification programs. And right now, if you're not in self-determination, you have to use their vendors. So you have to wait. If all the vendors have a wait list, you have to wait. The beauty of self-determination is once you have it approved, you can go anywhere and get it. You can go to some ABA agency that's not a vendor of Regional Center and say, hey, I want to sign up with you. This is how you're going to get paid from this financial management service, and you use your money that way. So I think it's worth exploring for people, and it is scary. And I know some parents have a lot of complaints, and when it first got started, there was a lot of issues with it. But I think what's important is if you have the energy to advocate or find someone who can help you, then it's worth it, I think. Okay, I do give you some links. So the self-determination initiatives are on, you're doing a great job. The self-determination link is first. Then we've got, there is a budget tool, so it kind of walks you through and shows you how you do your budget. And then here's those uniform budget categories I was talking about that you can use the money for. Oh, and I just want to say something. Just because I said you can't copyright this doesn't mean you can't share it or have a copy of it. You guys are allowed to have this and use it and whatever. I don't want other attorneys taking it and using it for themselves. So you guys are free to share this with whoever. There's a self-determination email for DDS. And then there's one for San Diego Regional Center who runs sort of the self-determination. So if you have questions, you can email both of those agencies and they'll get back to you. Okay, how do you request a service? Well, the first step is to ask for an IPP meeting. So it's really important you make these requests through IPP meetings, even though I know it sounds easier to just send an email. Judges, if you have to go to hearing, they're going to want to see that you sat down with your team and asked them, okay? You want to record the meeting. You can bring whoever you want with you. And you're going to want to look, if you go to this link, you're going to want to look at the POS guidelines because those tell you regional centers policy on those services. That doesn't mean that you have to follow it. It's just a policy, and sometimes people are outside of that box, right? But you should at least be familiar with it. Then if it's denied, oh, this is another link to the purchase of service standards. And again, these are not law. They're their policy on how they approve certain services. So what do you do if they deny your request? What do you do if they terminate a service you already have or reduce it? So if a service is already in place and they try to reduce it or terminate it, they have to give you notice in writing. If you appeal that within 10 days, so if you ask for a hearing within 10 days of receiving that reduction or termination, they have to continue funding that service until a judge says they don't have to. So your timeline to appeal is not 10 days, but it's 10 days if you want to keep that service while you're waiting for a judge to hear the case, okay? And you can continue your hearing multiple times. So I say don't miss the 10 days because you can withdraw your hearing request at any time. And they can't come after you for the service that they were providing during that interim period. Your real appeal timeline that you don't want to miss is 30 days. So if they deny a request or reduce or terminate, you have 30 days from receiving that notice to appeal it. And there should be appeal paperwork with the notice. They're supposed to give you the hearing request form. When you ask for a hearing, you can also either ask for an informal meeting or a mediation. An informal meeting is with Regional Center, and it's with Neil Kramer at San Diego Regional Center. He's a nice guy. But if you want a judge to be a part of it, then you ask for a mediation. And then if it doesn't resolve at one of those stages, it goes to hearing. Obviously, my office does hearings, but some people aren't able to pay for an attorney. So Disability Rights California also will help you. They're a nonprofit. And that's where I was the client's rights advocate for 5 years. So we do regional center cases only. Like those are our only clients. We'll help them with special ed, we'll help them with Medi-Cal, Social Security, and regional center. And it's a nonprofit. So if someone's not able to pay, it doesn't mean you have to just let the regional center do what they want. You can call Disability Rights and see if they'll help you. When you have these hearings, if you do this yourself, which I think regional center hearings are doable for parents. People don't want to do them, but I think it's doable. The judges are really nice. If it was special ed, I would say don't do it. But if it's regional center, they're different judges, and I think it's totally doable. But I give you some information here that I think is helpful. You have to exchange any evidence you want to present to the judge or present during the hearing. You have to give to the regional center 5 days before the hearing. So don't miss that timeline. You can ask the judge to issue subpoenas, which is for records or to make people be there to testify. And you want to provide all the evidence you gave to the regional center to the judge the day of hearing. Regional center puts its case on first, so you get to listen to why they denied something, and then you get to put your case on, and then you'll get a decision in writing within 10 days. They have to issue a decision within 10 days, which is really one of the shorter timelines for services, or to get a hearing decision on services. Here's my contact info. You're welcome to email me. That phone number goes to my assistant, Jennifer, but she mans the phones, so she'll get it and get it to me eventually.